happy rainy Monday. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for all the emails and attention to detail that you are providing with your discussion boards as well as your questions and plus the emails that you send. It's good to hear from you. Send me an email anytime. I'm here alone with my dog, so it's good to hear from you all. So today I'm going to talk to you about chapter 13 called 52. So the title has a couple of meanings. First is there's 52 weeks in a year, as well as Dickens carries on the metaphor of cards. There are 52 cards in a deck. So a couple chapters ago, there was a hand at cards and game made. So he's continuing on with that metaphor. And the game made and a hand at cards chapters were about Sidney Carton and John Barsad, and that continues on in this chapter. So just a couple of things to note. There isn't a lot of difficulty, I don't think, in this chapter. It's a good one. We get to see how the whole plot and plan is starting to play out in Sidney Carton's diabolical plan. So page 344, which is the beginning of the chapter, we really do get to see that the results of the revolution and all the people being killed, it doesn't discriminate, young, old, rich, poor, male, female, as long as there's 52 deaths a year, 52 deaths a day, they've met their quota. So we see Charles Darnay in this chapter, page 345. This is the day before he's going to be beheaded, and so he writes 3 letters. He writes one to Lucy, of course, admitting that he didn't know all of Dr. Manette's story and how Dr. Manette and the Evrémonde families were connected. So he does write that to Lucy. He also writes a letter to Dr. Manette and basically says, take care of my wife and child. Those are the kinds of things you say when you are on your deathbed. And then finally, he writes a letter to Mr. Lorry. The one thing that I thought was interesting on page 345 is he never thinks of Sidney Carton as he's writing these letters, because why would he? But as you read on, you'll notice that Sidney Carton becomes the main point for this whole chapter, and Sidney Carton comes to save the day. So continuing on, starting on page 347 is when Sidney Carton does show up to the conciergerie, and he has to go pretty much in secret. He's there with Barsad because of the deal that Barsad and Sidney Carton made and the information that Sidney Carton has on John Barsad. So Barsad brings him up to Charles Darnay's cell, and even Darnay realizes on page 347 that there is something so bright and remarkable in his look. So we get to see that Sidney Carton has lived his whole life for this moment in order to bring meaning to his life. Of course, Darnay is surprised to see Sidney Carton of all people because, they don't really have much of a friendship or even a camaraderie. But we're going to see that this is going to change. So on page 348, we have Sidney Carton being pretty forceful with Darnay because they don't have a ton of time. So Sidney Carton orders Charles Darnay to switch clothes. So now Charles Darnay will have Sidney Carton's clothes and Sidney will have Darnay's clothes. So you're starting to see what Sidney Carton's plan is going to be. So moving forward, we see the urgency of Sidney Carton. He asked Charles Darnay to start writing something. Charles Darnay is like, what do you want me to write? He's like, I don't care, just write something. So essentially, then Sidney Carton asks Darnay to recall words he said long ago, and this goes back to chapter 20. After Lucy and Darnay return home from their honeymoon, Sidney Carton basically says, will you always let me into your life a few times a year? Can I come around? So recall those words from chapter 20. And as they're having this conversation, Carton pulls out the vapor or the chemicals that he bought at the chemist shop and it starts to knock Charles Darnay out. So he starts to get woozy and a little faint, and he becomes unintelligible, dazed. And so then Carton changes into Darnay's clothes. Barsad is in on the whole thing. So Barsad then essentially takes Darnay out of the prison while Sidney Carton remains in the prison cell. So we get to see the whole point of this doppelganger, why Sidney Carton and Charles Darnay's familiar looks for one another are so important, because now Sidney Carton can be the prisoner and Charles Darnay can be Sidney Carton and hopefully see Lucy and his daughter and go back to England. So in page 351, now we have Sidney Carton, who's alone or in the prison, and he meets a young woman. She doesn't have a name, and I think that that's important that she doesn't have a name, because I don't think it matters that she is a specific person, but she refers to Sidney Carton as Evremond, and she says it several times, but she secretly does know that he is not an Evremond, and she understands what's going on. And so it's this tender reunion between this woman and Sidney Carton that shows us that Sidney Carton has become purposeful, has found meaning, and he provides comfort to this girl who is also about to be guillotined. And so that's where we end this video. I'm not sure. Yeah, we have a few more scenes, so I'm just going to stop this video here and continue on with part 2. All right, bye.